Howdy, welcome to week 7 in ALR210. I, of course, am your unit chair, Ross Monaghan. This week we're talking about media, press conferences, events and training. All of these are really central to media relations, and I wanted to give you a bit of background before I get you to go on and look at future slides in this week's topic. So media press conferences are something that I've been involved in throughout my career. I think I've talked about some of them in my in previous lectures or seminars. The first one that I ever fronted was with the Australian Federal Police when I was the CEO of the Australian Mobile Telecommunications Association. And I can tell you it was probably one of the most nerve-wracking things I have ever done in my career. Now, I remember a couple that we did. One was on the spur of the moment when we were having a round table. I was chair of an Australasian Crime Commissioners Forum on mobile phone theft issues. Yes, that's a public relations issue, because if the industry doesn't address those issues, then that's not good for the industry, because like working in PR for an organisations should do what the community expects of them. That's the best public relations, by doing what's expected. So in the same way, industries need to do what is expected of them as well. So as the head of the Mobile Phone Industry Association, I was representing the Telstras, the Vodafones, the Optuses of the world, and looking at how we could stop mobile phone theft. This was back in the days when if you had your phone stolen, other people could use it. Now you can't, because of the work I did, and with other people, of course. Your IME, International Mobile Equipment Identifier, is actually blocked from the network. So if it's stolen, the police will let the carriers know, and the carriers will share that information amongst themselves, and your phone will be blocked. So that was some public relations work that I've done, and it took several years to make that happen within the industry. Now, we were having this Crime Commissioners Forum. We met monthly, and we were at, I think, the Winchester Centre in Canberra, and some of the TV stations got wind of the fact that this meeting was happening. So instead of doing individual interviews with the different news services, the Federal Police comms people decided that we would have a off-the-cuff media conference. It was going to make it much easier. We could make some statements and we could answer questions with all of the news crews there. So it was much more convenient for us. It was, I guess, issues management, and it worked really well because we were able to get the same message out to different news services at the one time. We were able to invite others that hadn't got wind of the issue, and we were able to let everyone know what we were doing. We also wanted to show that the industry was working with the Federal Police, and of course the Federal Police wanted to show people that they were addressing this issue. So we met during the day. We held the press conference mid to late afternoon, I think, and then that night it was over national news. So that's how you could use a press conference in relation to issues or crisis management. It wasn't a crisis because, the industry wasn't it wasn't like the industry was going to go under because of that. So it wasn't a crisis. It was an issue that needed to be addressed. And although we didn't plan the media conference, it was a great way to get that information out there. Of course, if you're doing publicity and you've got more time for these sort of news conferences, you're going to have a much better chance of getting the media that you want to come along to your session. You'll have more time to plan where it is, the time that it's going to be. You'll have time to develop your messages, some Q&As, some background documents, all of those sorts of things. And if you do it well, you can expect to get a lot of media attention. But they're a lot of work. They're time consuming, they're resource intensive. So to do them well, you've got to think about a whole range of issues to make it really seamless and easy for the media, because journos and the camera operators are really pushed for time. They've got to get in, get out, particularly for the daily news bulletins. People like a current affair have a lot more time. Their crews don't do as many stories. So as a PR practitioner, you've got to think about the time that's going to be appropriate for them, how you can facilitate them getting in and out quickly, how you can get the messages to them with their spokespeople. Are you going to do a tour? All of these things are covered in the readings this week, but I wanted you to think about the different types of media conferences. For crisis, have a look at the MH370 exercise I've set you this week, and you'll go and have a look at some of the media conferences that Malaysian Airlines did after the disappearance of MH370. So that's a crisis, an issue where I just mentioned, where it's an ongoing issue for the industry. Both of these crises and issues, you have them ad hoc to keep the public informed about what you're doing, and for publicity and to garner more attention to a product or a service or maybe an issue. If you've got more time, you can plan these things, make it really convenient. Now, I've been to press conferences where almost no one has turned up, and that's really embarrassing, and thankfully I wasn't involved in the organisation of them. But I wanted to highlight that just because you're having a media conference or a press conference doesn't mean that the media are going to come along. What's the number one rule? Well, you could talk about being convenient at a time that it's suitable, it's easy for them to get to. But unless the news angle is right, unless the media are going to be interested in the issue, you're not going to have any chance of the media coming along. Because if it's not in their readers' interest, or that readers or the viewers or the listeners don't want to know about that, then none of the media are going to come along, because it's going to take them an hour or so to come along and report on those issues. So whilst there's a lot to think about when doing media conferences, the number one thing in media relations, if you're going to get your issues in the media, is to know about news angles and what makes a good news story. Now, there's no other way of determining that than looking and reading and listening to what's making news at the time that you're thinking about these issues. Understanding current affairs and general issues is so important for media relations practitioners. Even if you are a sports media relations practitioner, you're going to have to understand what the bigger picture is. Is there a federal election? So our news crew is going to be at a briefing by the opposition leader or the prime minister at a time when you want to do your media conference. Now, chances are that the crews will have, the news services will have different crews, but you wouldn't want them to clash. So understanding all of these issues is really important, not only to get the news angle, but to know what's going on and to get the biggest bang for your buck. So media conferences, there's a lot to read about, there's a lot to think about. There are even technical aspects of media conferences that I don't expect you to understand, and different organisations will have different ways to do things. You'll need to have plugs that the media can plug their equipment into. You'll need to think about perhaps live streaming your event. Are you going to just set up a mobile phone, as some organisations do, after maybe a bushfire or flooding event? Local councils will set up, a media a stream, particularly for the media, so that they can cover public meetings, those sort of things. Or are you going to have a dedicated, quite expensive live streaming service? All of these are the things that you need to think about with media conferences. Also, when you're thinking about media conferences, sometimes, as you'll read in the textbook this week, that you can have events. So you can have media tours with them to add a little bit more to the event for the media. So particularly for TV crews, you might want to get background footage. You might want to do Q&As. You might want to do factory tours with people. We've all seen the politicians in high visibility vests. Why is that important for the politicians? I'll let you know. It's because it looks like they're actually doing something, and people want leaders that are action-oriented, not just sitting behind a desk. So whilst a lot of the times the politicians will have a media conference at maybe a train station, they'll stand in front of some microphones, then afterwards they'll walk, put on the high-vis vests and maybe a safety helmet and glasses, and maybe walk along the train line. Well, not when trains are coming, or maybe beside the train line, or look at some earth-moving equipment. So press conferences, then we have an event afterwards to give the media more information and to maximise our chance of getting really decent and extensive coverage of those issues. So think about how events can work in with press conferences. Sometimes you might just want to do an event, and that may be enough to get the media along. Maybe it's an open house for your factory where you let the public in and let them come through and see how, for example, Vegemite is made for the 100th anniversary of the invention of Vegemite. Not necessarily a press conference, but it would be something that the media would almost certainly be interested in. Why? What's the news angle of an open house and people touring through a Vegemite factory on the 100th anniversary? Yep, that's right. It's the 100th anniversary, which is a milestone event, something unique. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is a really long introduction, is the importance of training. Most likely, if you are involved in media relations, you will be involved in media training. Not necessarily doing the training yourself. It might be that you get a external trainer to come in and train senior executives on how to deal with the media, how they can answer key messages. The media trainers will generally ask questions of your senior executives. Drilling is the word I was looking for. They will drill them, so they'll ask the question over and over again in different ways so that the senior executives can answer the questions in appropriate ways. Now, further in the slides today, there's Peter Wilkinson has commented on the way a government minister has communicated about a royal commission and was questioning whether that was open, honest and transparent and ethical communication. Have a look at that. There's a bit of reading. There is some video to watch. I encourage you to do that and have a look at how the minister has answered questions, because the way that we answer questions is really important in the media. We need an understanding of how the media works so that we can answer the questions in a way that's going to get our message across to our target publics. Just as an example, if you were training executives to do on-camera interviews, you'd need an understanding, or to train them to think about, is it for the nightly news or is it for maybe a current affair? Now, they're very different, and training your executives to understand the difference is really important. One really fundamental difference is that if you were going to be on the evening news, the TV crew would come, and you really need to remember that it's only a couple of seconds that you've got to get your message across. Literally, you've got to get your message across in probably less than 3 seconds. 15, 20 years ago, you probably had maybe 7 or 8 seconds. Now, if you look at the nightly news, you'll see that key spokespeople, it's down to 1, 2, or maybe 3 words sometimes. So thinking about the type of interview you're doing is really important. Get your message across in a really short period of time. Now, for example, if you're doing a TV coverage, as I have done, you might want to say that there's no substantial evidence that mobile phones cause adverse health effects. Can you see that I've said that quite a few times? So I remember one time when I really didn't have a lot of time to prepare for an interview. I knew it was going on Channel 10 News. They called me just before I was about to get on a flight. They met me at the Gate Lounge up in Sydney, I think it was. As soon as I got off the flight, they grabbed me and they stuck me in front of the camera and they asked me questions. Now, knowing that there's only a couple of seconds on the news, it didn't matter what the health study was. It didn't matter about what people were concerned about. I knew what message I wanted on the Channel 10's news that night. And I wanted the message, there's no substantiated evidence that mobile phones cause adverse health effects. I wanted that. So it didn't matter what question I was asked, that's what I was going to say. So, hello, can you tell me your name? There's no substantiated evidence. It seems a bit weird, doesn't it? But if you know that trick, and I will call it a trick because it's not particularly ethical, I don't think, but sometimes in a pinch you need to use those sort of strategies to get the message out there really quickly. Now, I think it is ethical because I wanted to reassure people that there is no evidence that mobile phones cause health effects. So no matter what other people said, that was the consensus of the science. And thankfully, we were proven right. Whereas if you're going to do a current affair, and I've done some of those, and they are just brutal interviews, they will get the camera right up in your face so they can see you flinch. And if you answer a question and move your eyes a little bit like that, then it makes you look shifty. And so when you're answering a question, you would have to answer it fully. You'd have to stare at the camera, make sure that you have all of the non-verbal communication just right. So getting all of that right is really, really important. So understanding the difference, knowing how to answer questions. In future slides in today's presentation, you look at the ABC of how to answer questions. So training is really important for senior executives, but all people throughout the organization, because you want to let them know that individuals within an organization aren't going to have the broad understanding of what's happening in the organization. So they might think they know something about an issue, but it's important to have the bigger picture. So training people on what to do if you are doorstopped by the media. So for example, you're coming to work or you're at the airport or you're going to the shops and Channel 7 or ABC stick a camera in your face. You don't want to say no comment or stick your hands over the camera like that. You all know that that's wrong, right? There is a link down here for the very first media event that I attended, and that was for BHP, and my boss actually did that, put his hand over the camera and pushed one of the camera people into a creek, and it made national news. And it's a notorious how not to deal with the media issue, and I've linked into that with that link below. So have a look at that, and also just have a think about how not-for-profits can use events like that to garner a lot of media attention as well. But getting back to training, letting employees know how to deal with those sorts of issues. If you're not the spokesperson, what can you say? So instead of saying, look, I'm not allowed to talk to you, I'm just the shift supervisor. If you're at a steelworks, you'd want your shift supervisor to say, look, we're happy to answer your questions, but I want to get somebody who can answer the questions fully with broad knowledge of everything that's going on. So let me take you to our public affairs team, and that way you'll get accurate answers to your questions. They're not going to use that on the news, whereas if they went and the shift supervisor said, no, I'm not allowed to talk to you, and put the hand over the camera or something similar, it just says as it goes in and out of focus, that's possibly going to make news. So all of these things are really important. Oh, and another media training tip. this is one of my favorites, that if you are surprised by the media and they stick a camera in front of you, the number one rule in media relations is always be prepared. Know the facts, know what you're going to say, have your 3 key messages. If they stick a camera in your face, they jump out from behind a car or a tree in some sort of creepy way, you're not going to be prepared. At minimum, you need to draw breath and think about your key messages. Now, a great tip is to say something like, happy to talk to you, but look, I just need to make a personal phone call first. It's something really important. I'll do that. Or, I need to go to the bathroom. Can you just give me a second? I'll go to the bathroom and then I'll come out and answer your questions. Now, that's a really good strategy because that's unlikely to end up on the news. And if it did, well, I think it's probably going to make the news crew look a little bit dodgy. Now, use what works for you, what is really, really true at that time. I'm not saying lie to them. I'm saying use a strategy. Think about some reason that you need to sit down and recuperate and just think about your key messages. So even if they did surprise you, you can go away, sit down for a couple of minutes and just think of your key messages. Even if it's just saying, look, I'm really happy to talk to you. I just need a couple of minutes to collect my thoughts. I've just got a couple of things I need to do, and then I'm happy to talk to you. Not a lie, completely ethical. They were prepared. As a professional spokesperson, you have the need to be prepared as well. And finally, I'm just going to go back to the link below, which is to the Greenpeace raid on the Port Kembla Steelworks, where the Rainbow Warrior, which ended up being bombed by the French Secret Service when it was in New Zealand, and some people lost their lives tragically. But one of my first big media issues was when I was working at the Port Kembla Steelworks, and Greenpeace raided the steelworks to get publicity for what they claimed was excessive pollution from the steelworks. TV crews there, it was a big event in Australia back before most of you were born. It was a really exciting time for me as a PR practitioner to see how that works. The executive director of Greenpeace International, Paul Gilding, was the skipper of the Rainbow Warrior. That was their ship at the time. Got to meet him and work with him in when I was at Optus. But think about how these sort of issues, whether it's press conferences or events, can actually garner a lot of attention. Sorry, it's been a really long introduction. The rest of the slides, I think, are pretty self-evident. I encourage you to have a look at the recording of the lecture. The seminar. There are no lectures. Deakin decided that there were no lectures in this class, only the seminars. Go figure, that's not my choice. Have a look at those, and if you've got any questions, put them in the discussion area. That's it. On to slide 2.